So lately, there's been a lot of talk about celebrities and child sex trafficking and just raping children in general. Yes, it's rape, they are underage. And it's actually surprising how many people do not know about Elvis Presley's story. So I'm just going to get a quick overview of it. So, of course, everything will be linked below so that you guys are able to look at it yourselves. And so the title of this is Priscilla Presley Talks Striking Up Romance with Elvis Aged 14. It's a different world. So whenever she met Elvis Presley, whenever she was 14 years old, and obviously they ended up married. So I will go through the story with you guys real quick. There are tons of actual sites with this information as it's public knowledge. This is something that actually did happen. It's not a conspiracy. So Wikipedia just quickly says, during Elvis Presley's army career, he met Priscilla on September 13th, 1959, during a party at his home in Bad Nauheim, Germany. Though only 14 years old, she made a huge impression on him. Elvis Presley and Priscilla first met when he was 24 and she was 14. Their age difference was not a problem for Elvis, who thought he could mold Priscilla into his ideal woman. So I'm going to click that third hyperlink, which says who thought he could mold Priscilla, so that we can see what that means. So the link actually brought me to People's Magazines, but it's actually an interview. It has what Priscilla actually told the interview person, I guess. I've actually seen the same script here in multiple different places of her saying it, so it is real. I'll just read through some of it, pause if you guys actually want to take the time to read it, or actually go to the link. She was an impressionable 14-year-old. He was 24. She was an insecure Air Force brat, unhappily accustomed to moving from base to base. She finds out she was actually adopted from his marriage to her mother, and that her real father was actually a Navy pilot who was killed in a plane crash when she was only 6 months old. And she was told by her mother not to tell her siblings so that they didn't find out. Until, obviously, they found out when they were older, but at the time they were years younger. And, of course, it says the conversation actually brought them all closer together. And then she goes on to say that people always thought she was the prettiest girl in school, but she never felt that way. Her mother was too shy to talk about the facts of life, so she never learned about sex education other than the 6th grade. Some kids were passing around that looked like the Bible from the outside, but when you opened it, there were pictures of men making love to women and women making love to each other. Her body was changing. She was getting looks from boys. Basically, she was embarrassed about her own sexuality. She fantasized endlessly with French kissing and would play spin the bottle and let boys pursue her lips. So in 1959, her father was assigned to Wiesbaden. I'm not good at pronunciation, so I'm sorry. But she found herself deeply involved with Elvis. Something in his southern upbringing had taught him that the right girl was to be saved for marriage. I was that girl. At the same time, he molded me into his woman. I wore the clothes, hairstyle, and makeup of his careful choosing. She was a 14-year-old girl. He was 24, and he molded her into the girl he wanted her to be. Now, I have not seen her say many bad things about him. It's all been typical high school romance, sweetheart love, But this does not seem right to me. He was molding her into the girl he wanted her to be. She never got to grow up on her own. She was only 14 years old. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I was 14 years old, I was a completely different person than who I am right now. He chose the clothing, the hairstyle, makeup, molded me into his woman. So she goes on to say that her parents became confused and bewildered by their relationship. They tried to make them believe it was proper and platonic, and they wanted to believe me. Whenever they tried to stop us from seeing each other, I pleaded and cried and made them and myself miserable. In retrospect, I don't think anything could have stopped me from seeing Elvis. The story of my life with him really began when I was 11 and living with my family at Bergstrom Air Force Base in Austin, Texas. One night, my father came home late for dinner and handed me a record album. I don't know what this Elvis guy is all about, he said, but he must be something special. I stood in line with half the armed forces at the PX to get this for you. Everybody wants it. So she listened to the record, she loved him, It was his first album. 3 years later, and 5,500 miles away, I would meet him. So here it says that her father transferred. She was lonely and homesick. Whenever some handsome guy in his 20s was staring at her, I'd seen him watching me before, but I never paid attention to him. This time he stood up and walked toward me. He introduced himself as Curry Grant. He asked where in the States I came from, how I liked Germany, and if I liked Elvis Presley. Of course, I said, who doesn't? I'm a good friend of his. My wife and I go to his house quite often. How would you like to join us one evening? Unprepared for such extraordinary invitation, I became guarded. I told him I'd have to ask my parents. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, Curry met my parents and my father, checked out his credentials. Curry was also in the Air Force, and it turned out that my father knew his commanding officer. This seemed to break the ice. On the appointed night, Curry picked me up and drove me to an ordinary-looking 3-story house surrounded by a white picket fence. There was a sign on the gate in German, which translated as autographs between 7 and 8 p.m. only. The plain, almost drab living room was filled with people, but I spotted Elvis immediately. He was handsomer than he appeared in films, younger, more vulnerable looking with his GI haircut. He was in civilian clothes, a bright red sweater and tan slacks, and he was sitting with one leg swung over the arm of a large overstuffed chair with a scar dangling from his lips. So she's giving this interview years later. I'm pretty sure this was actually after he died. So probably like 50 years after the fact of when it happened, and she remembers all of this very vividly. So it clearly did make a big impact on her. Keep in mind, this is the night that they both said that they became involved with each other. So Elvis stood up and smiled while he said, "What have we here? What are you, about a junior or senior in high school?" She blushed, said nothing, not willing to reveal she was only in the 9th grade. "Well," he persisted, "9th. Elvis looked confused. "9th what?" "Grade," I whispered. "9th grade," he said, and started laughing. "Why, you're just a baby." Most people, typically, you would expect them nowadays to not be in this situation, obviously, but to also turn away once you realize she's so much younger. Obviously, different time period. So here we see Still I Never Expected to Hear From Again. I skipped some. If you guys want to go back and read it, the link is below. So the visits were similar to the first. Then on the third visit, after Elvis had finished singing, he came up to me. "I want to be alone with you, Priscilla. Will you come upstairs to my room?" Let me remind you, 14 years old. And also, reminder, this is an interview. She said these things. This is her point of view. This is her telling us what happened. As he spoke, he was smoothing my hair. "I swear I'll never do anything to harm you." He sounded absolutely sincere. "I'll treat you just like a sister." Standing there looking into his eyes, I was drawn to him almost against my will. I believed him. Then I nodded. "All right, I'll go." Upstairs in Elvis's room, which was as plain and impersonal as the other rooms in the house, I cuddled in his arms as Elvis talked to me about his mother, who had died August 14th, 1958, and how deeply he missed her. When it was time for me to go, he kissed me goodbye. My first real kiss. He broke away first, saying, "We have plenty of time, little one." 14 years old. By our 4th date, Dad has laid down the law. If you want to continue seeing Elvis, we're going to have to meet him. Elvis Bristol then agreed, provided he could bring his father along. He arrived in his BMW wearing his army uniform to impress Dad. There was small talk, then Dad offered dinner, but Elvis said he didn't have time. Finally, my father got around to explaining to Elvis the dating rules. If he wanted to see me, Elvis had to pick me up and bring me home. Elvis explained that by the time he got off duty, went home, cleaned up, came to Wise in bed, and back, the evening would be gone. Would it be all right to have his father collect me? Dad mulled this over, then expressed his concern. "Just what is the intent here? Let's face it, you're Elvis Presley. You have women throwing themselves at you. Why my daughter?" "Well, sir, I happen to be very fond of her. She's a lot more mature than her age, and I enjoy her company. It hasn't been easy for me being away from home and all. It gets kind of lonely, I guess you might say. I need someone to talk to. You don't have to worry about her, Captain. I'll take good care of her." Elvis disarmed Dad just as he did my mother. I joined Elvis as he stood, picked up his hat, and added, "Well, sir, we've got a long drive." Gradually, a pattern developed. Elvis would call after 7 to let me know that I'd be picked up at 8. I had to dress quickly, trying to find some way to appear older than my age. At times, I'd borrow my mother's clothes and hope everyone would assume I was at least 16. Once I was with Elvis, I never felt that we had enough time alone. People were always dropping by, standing around in the living room, talking and laughing until Elvis came down from his room. As soon as he appeared, the room would become silent until he revealed his mood. No one, including myself, dared joke around unless he laughed, and then we all laughed. Because I had to share this little time I had with Elvis with so many others, I began to feel jealous and possessive. It was only late in the evening when we were in his bedroom that I was truly... I'm going to be skipping ahead now, and so here's another part. 21 days after he left, the phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning. Hi, baby. How's my little girl? As we lay in the dim light, he soon discovered that I was still a virgin. Relieved and pleased, he told me how much this meant to him. I began kissing him passionately. I wanted him. I was ready to submit entirely to him. Then abruptly he stopped. Wait a minute, baby, he said, speaking softly. This can get out of hand. She says, Elvis, I want you. He put his finger to my lips and whispered, not yet, not now. We have a lot to look forward to. I'm not going to spoil you. I just want to keep you the way you are for now. There will be a right time and place, and when the moment comes, I'll know it. Later that night, he had her stay with friends. Later, I found out through one of the wives whom I had befriended the reason for my spending the first night with George and Shirley, and apparently Anita Wood, Elvis's girlfriend from the days way back before he met me, had been sent to Memphis, and Elvis was taking precautions to avoid any awkward situations for himself that might have resulted from late-night phone calls. Going back to the first link I used, Elvis saw a resemblance between Priscilla and his recently deceased and much lamented mother, Gladys. He also told his friend, Rex Mansfield, that Priscilla was young enough that I could train her any way I want. Elvis wanted Priscilla to meet again, blah, blah, blah. What we already discussed, but the singer liked that Priscilla was young and inexperienced. So although we know that Elvis was very interested in Priscilla, and as she was with him, they did not have sex until their wedding night in 1967. He proposed before Christmas in 1966. The wedding night was the first time the couple went all the way. Priscilla also got pregnant right away, which made Elvis worry about how fatherhood would affect his career. When Priscilla was 7 months pregnant, he asked for a trial separation, though they were only apart for a short time. Daughter Lisa Marie was born on February 1st, 1968, 9 months after her parents' wedding. So they got married 67, baby was born 68, 9 months. You guys do the math. She did get pregnant very quickly. Their divorce, which was finalized on October 9th, 1973, was an amicable one. Priscilla would say in a 2016 interview, I did not divorce him because I didn't love him. He was the love of my life, but I had to find out about the world. They shared custody of Lisa Marie and regularly saw each other after learning that Elvis died on August 16th, 1977. Priscilla was devastated. She wrote in her memoir, Elvis and Me, I Wanted to Die. So again, she wrote books on this. You can also read the books, as there are also many interviews she did. So as you can see, she divorced him because she had to find out about the world. They started whenever she was only 14 years old. He molded her into the woman he wanted her to be. Did her hair, the makeup. He chose everything for her. This was obviously not a good life for her, as she was way too young for this situation. She was groomed. That's what we would say nowadays. She was groomed into what he wanted her to be. So just a quick Google search on her. She's currently an American actress. She was born May 24th, 1945. She's currently 75 years old. Her spouse was Elvis Presley, 1967 to 1973. So, 1945, that's less than 100 years ago. It does not seem like such a big deal, but obviously things were different back then. There were a lot of people married to younger people. It was, I guess, normal for back then. Obviously, it would not be okay today, as we know how harmful it is. She admitted herself that her situation was harmful. Although she did love him, she was groomed into it. Her brain was not even fully formed. She was 14 years old, and she was made into what he wanted her to be instead of being her own person. So that's all I have to say on this. I'm surprised not many people are actually aware of this, or at least not many people that I've seen post about it, because I'm seeing a lot of people amazed that this actually happened. This did happen. It's true. There are interviews, stories. She wrote a book. Check it out. I will try to do more of these on 2 other celebrities, because there's obviously been a lot of instances just like this, and sadly there are even more current cases than just 1950s, 1960s.